Welcome to Xagility. I'm your host, John Coleman.
Hello everyone, my name is Robert Annis. I'm an Agile coach and trainer, but what does that mean? It's a pretty common title these days. My focus is very much on organizational agility, but not merely based upon the normal approach of Agile and Scrum and those kinds of things. Really focused on organizational and individual psychology. So really my focus is very much on the growth and development of people and their organizations through well understood psychological theories and practices, and that's really led me down a certain path that isn't just your standard approach. So a lot of the things that I focus on aren't just about agility, they're about the things that align with it and frankly sometimes become necessary for Agile to succeed. So really my background focuses on that, and that's really where my career path is leading me more and more. So I'm hoping with the discussion with John to bring a bit of that sense of interest, really. Fingers crossed.
That sounds really interesting. Pia Maria Thorne was on middle of March 2021, and she's got the Agile People manifesto, and she talks about needing Agile people coaches.
Yes.
So that's an area that a lot of people kind of miss out on. So welcome to the show, Robert, and thank you so much for coming. I wanted to talk about the Agile manifesto, and I have to be honest, I cringe about this.
I can't imagine why.
It's, I mean, it has stood the test of time, to be fair, right? And there's been loads of attempts to kind of come up with new ones, Agile, Enterprise manifesto, and so on and so forth. Even the modern Agile manifesto, I'm not even sure that really took off properly. But there were 17 middle-aged white men. They mightn't have been middle-aged then, by the way. They probably were younger men then, but still, there was all men. I think they were all white as well. And yeah, that's kind of cringy.
Sure. Happening today.
And I was told a story, actually, that a lady was supposed to be there. Yeah. So Ari van Bennekom was standing in for a lady who was supposed to be there. I don't have the lady's name. I should research that. So yeah, but still, it would have been 116. Still wouldn't have been a great number, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's one of those interesting things that we talk about how inclusive Agile is meant to be and how it's meant to be about a change agent for everyone, and yet it comes from a sort of white, older male, English speaking, a very specific demographic that doesn't really speak to that inclusivity, doesn't speak to that everyone can do this, everyone can achieve this, right? So yeah, it's interesting beginning for the platform. I agree with you. It's not ideal, to say the least.
And for those people listening, I get the irony of someone like me talking about diversity and inclusion, and so does Robert. Yeah. And so one of the things that I try to do, for example, is my public training, I do training as well. I have these tickets like for member of underrepresented community, so like they get a much cheaper ticket. So just try to provide more access. But coming back to the manifesto, it is still useful. But there's a couple of things we need to do when we're reading it, because it was originally written for software development, because they were all software developers. And Robert and I are both coaches, and I think, Robert, you'd probably agree with me, that was probably a modern day miracle they were able to agree anything. Can you imagine 17 coaches getting together agreeing something?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. You could wonder how they managed. Maybe it should just be about, we managed to facilitate this and that was the achievement. But I think you're right. Agility struggles because of its background. I've come up against hundreds of people, I'm sure you have too, where it's the immediate response is, we don't do software development, so this Agile thing, we can take bits of it, but bits of it don't work for us. And I think what's fascinating about that is the idea that if something comes from somewhere, it's only suitable for that purpose. A lot of people compare, for example, the idea that agility can be used for software, but then anything else like hardware or building projects or I don't know, anything. You've got to use something like waterfall or some other approach. But a lot of approaches started in software. For example, waterfall itself was created in 1970 for software development, right? So I think the idea that because it comes from somewhere doesn't mean it's only specific for that. Perhaps part of the openness we're looking for with agility would be the first step of being open to say, just because it doesn't come from my world, from my industry or my country, or whatever it may be, doesn't mean it can't be helpful.
Yeah,
I think that's an important thing to remember.
Yeah, I agree. And we just have to make sure that when we apply it in a different area, that we test it and we don't assume that it works. But yeah, I agree. I think a lot of these principles and these values we want to talk about, they are applicable really almost in any type of work where we use our brain, basically.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to read through this, but when I read through it, I'm going to replace the word software with product or product development, because that's probably what it's about really, right?
Yeah, interesting. When I do the same thing. When I read through it, I actually replace software with value delivery.
Oh, nice.
Because then it's not about, because some organizations, for example, aren't delivering a product as such.
Yeah. It's nice touch.
Marketing or something, right?
Yeah.
Some sort of value is kind of what I focus on. But yeah, the same sort of thinking.
I'm going to try that. Let's try it. Okay. So we're uncovering better ways of delivering value, I guess. So that first piece is really crucial. We're uncovering better ways. We don't assume we know it all. There's always something to be understood, right?
Yeah, it's evolving. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's by doing value delivery and helping others to do it. And through this work, we've come to value. And they come up with these 4 values. And these 17 people, I think it was a skiing weekend or something. I think they came up with this in the après ski or something like that.
Snowbird ski resort in Utah.
Yeah. And so here they are. So the first one was individuals in interactions over processes and tools. So basically talking to each other, using whiteboards, even virtual whiteboards, video calls, instant messaging over email. Although back then they were probably talking about face-to-face. So I think we still prefer face-to-face too, if we're honest, right?
I think this is one of the most misunderstood ones, John, particularly right now. I hear a lot of people sort of saying to me, well, we can't do Agile because we're not face-to-face anymore because of COVID and obviously everyone working from home and things like that. This can't work. These things aren't written sort of absolutes. They're good sort of aims. So if the best way to do it is to have really good interactions, and you think, well, how do we do that well, even though we are apart, right? We don't just fall back and rely on an old process, an old tool like good old email. Right?
Yeah. Because it's kind of a bit one directional, isn't it? It's a bit, and so the next one then is something that's working over comprehensive documentation. So actually having something that people can give feedback on, I suppose, or we collaborate what to do next. And then, and collaborating, really collaborating in terms of what we're going to do, instead of saying we're going to do all this, we'll have all that done by Christmas, boss, kind of thing. Instead of just, I think the last 2 values kind of go hand in hand: customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. And I was at a training class with Rich Hunthausen earlier week. He's a friend of mine, trainer also in Scrum.org, and he says the good thing about a sprint review in Scrum, for example, is that the customers and end users get to see what they don't want, even though it's maybe what they asked for, because people struggle to articulate what they want, don't they?
Yeah, there's a very strange cultural problem here. We're drawing back to my psychology now, and I do apologize. I'll keep it brief. But we've built a culture that says the worst thing you can do is make a mistake. And that starts in school, where children are taught to know facts. They're not taught to think as much as they are to know the right things. There's right and wrong answers. And that leads into adulthood. And that is, we must hit the date, right? Simply saying you're going to hit the date doesn't mean you'll hit a date. Doesn't mean anything, right? But there's this sort of, things are right? There's a correct way to do things. And I think both of these values are very speaking to the point of actually, the future is unknown. And the best thing we can do is do feedback and work together to find the best way to achieve this. Simply having a plan or a contract doesn't actually confirm the future at all. It just says, I want. And so the good thing about these 2 values here for me, John, is that they're really thinking, well, how do we work together to be successful? which is a pretty logical way to work.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing about the manifesto was, well, a lot of people think that Agile equals Scrum and Scrum equals Agile. And I even mentioned Scrum there in passing, but don't be thinking that I think that that's the right thing to use, even though I might be a Scrum trainer as well. Only 3 people out of the 17, as far as I'm aware, were into Scrum. So you had Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland, for example, and Mike Beadle, he died a few years ago, unfortunately. But the other people there were mostly from other approaches at the time, like extreme programming, for example, and agile testing and all these other kind of approaches. So a lot of approaches were invented even since then.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was kind of interesting. And I believe that they were tempted to call it the adaptive manifesto. But one of the thought leaders who was there had something called adaptive whatever. And there was a bit of a clash there, so they kind of went with Agile, and I hear people in America calling it Agile, which confuses me, so maybe some American friends could explain that to me someday. But so they're the 4 values, and so they managed to agree those during the trip, if you like. And then one of the guys who was there, which Ward Cunningham, he's the guy who invented Wiki, wasn't he? He did this Wiki page on the principles. So they agreed 12 principles in the few weeks afterwards, I believe. And I'm going to read through them, and myself and Robert are going to kind of chat about some of these. And if I see something that's kind of too software focused, I'll kind of, not that we don't appreciate software, but I'm just trying, this conversation is really about agility for everybody, really. So I'm going to try to be generic on that basis. So I'll start with the first one. So the first one is our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of value. That's kind of a nice one, and most people like that one. The next one, depending on your belief system, some people like it, some people don't. Welcoming changing requirements, even late in development. Yes. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. That's kind of a weird one, isn't it, Robert? That one. Yeah. What's your thought on that one?
For me, it makes people feel uncomfortable. There's this idea that work, particularly in projects, I think projects more than sort of standard work like operational or other things like that. Projects rely on some sort of level of certainty, this idea that we know what we're doing. When almost all projects, actually, once you start getting to a later phase of building it, you actually find out most of it, what you did was either incorrect or not quite right. I think culturally, that's uncomfortable to talk about. And so it's hard to accept the idea that requirements do change. But if you are doing a project over a period of time, it does happen very, very commonly. But also, I think we put people in a strange position when we go to a business sponsor or a stakeholder or someone like that and ask them what they want. The idea that they actually know what they want in the future is an odd idea. To say, what do you want 1 year from now? They'll always have certain answers because they're going to feel like they better have an answer because they're the expert, right? They're the stakeholder. But it's an odd thing to ask of somebody. If you were to say to someone, what fashion design, I'm just picking a random thing, will be in vogue next September or 2 years from now? The answer would be, I don't really know. But for some reason in projects, we seem to have this level of certainty. So I think sort of saying to someone that requirements can change, it feels a little uncomfortable perhaps.
Yeah, and even the word requirement for me as well, we make some jokes, myself and some other trainers, about the word requirement, because if some people use, for example, something like a product backlog, a list of all the things you might need to get done, probably the worst name for, might be a product, and backlog sounds like we're behind and stuff, but leave all that aside, we're kind of stuck with that language now. But if you had a product backlog and you had a load of stuff in it, calling everything a requirement is a bit of a misnomer, really, because we mightn't actually deliver them. Because the new ideas are usually better than the old ideas, aren't they? So the word desirement, which doesn't exist as a word yet in the dictionary, but maybe it will at some point.
Are you campaigning for that?
yeah, I think so. So the next one then is a bit weird for me, right? But it's at the time as we probably were a modern day rock star if you could deliver something between a couple of weeks and a couple of months. So deliver working value, I guess, frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with the preference to the shorter time scale. The lean guys, as in like the 21st century lean guys, would be uncomfortable with this because delivering something that's working frequently isn't necessarily what you need to do. Sometimes you we don't even know what the product should be. We don't even know who the customer is, customer discovery, product discovery. We might need to run some experiments, you know what I mean? We might need, so if people implement Scrum badly, for example, they might say, oh, build it and they will come, and yay, we get loads of value, but actually maybe some of it should never have been born, right?
Yeah. It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think it's how do you change that situation to where people are understanding the value in it? I think that's really the point for me, is that most organizations see value in completing the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right. And seeing value in creating a small piece, there's no value in that. The example I always talk about is in my training, is sort of like an aircraft carrier. When you've built an entire aircraft carrier, you have an aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
You can't take the deck and just float it in the sea and say that will now function. It doesn't work that way. And I think a lot of people will argue that case. But if you build a small piece of the deck, you could then test that to see if it reaches the tolerances that you need it to do before building the whole thing.
Yeah.
So there is great value in building small pieces.
Yeah.
But for a lot of organizations, that's a tough bit of thinking to get around. I think culturally, that's not how it's normally seen. So I think that's part of the challenges of Agile, if you like.
Yeah, I guess the good thing about this principle is that if people are, for example, sprinting for 10 months and they haven't delivered anything, you just look at this principle and say, okay, we're probably not for that. Maybe it's like a kind of a, I don't know, kind of a limit or a constraint almost. And you're not really Agile, are you? Kind of thing. And the next one's interesting. So business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project or the product development or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so people who think that business people aren't in the team, it's like, oh, I don't want to be talking to those people every day. No, I don't want that. But then other people are thinking, well, actually, they should be in the team. You'd have the business domain experts and the technical domain experts working together, collaborating on what to do next. So it kind of depends what world you're in, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those that pushes people away who aren't in the software world because of the talk of developers and business people and things like that. I think at the end of the day, anyone who's been frustrated by a decision that's made without them being involved should be able to understand this one. If you sat at home and, I don't know, your government does something, you think, why have they made that decision? That's stupid, right? Why they made that policy? And you wish, why wasn't I involved in that decision? Why couldn't I be involved? And I think that's the thinking here, is that those who want something should be able to speak to those who are actually creating the solution, whatever it may be, and are able to actually have that discussion to influence it, right? So I think there's great benefit with it. It's just, I think maybe the software bit maybe pulls people away from it.
Yeah. And then the next one's kind of nice. I think you might like this one. So building projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and support they need and trust them to get the job done.
Why would you say I'd like that one?
Kind of in the people, it's kind of...
Yeah. No, I mean, this is a brilliant one for me because it speaks to the real challenge of agility. The majority of organizations that I've ever worked with, and hopefully it's not my influence, they're not particularly motivated places, whether you work with a non-profit, with a governmental organization, with a private business. You don't always walk in and go, wow, these people are joyous and loving it. And I think for me, one big focus is here, whether you're doing agility or not, whatever you're trying to achieve in an organization, if your people aren't motivated, then you are missing probably the greatest achievement you could have. If people are motivated, they're going to work really well and they'll work really hard. So in other words, if people aren't motivated, your efficiency is going to be much, much lower than it could be. So this one has huge potential benefit where the people are happier and the organization is more successful. So I like this one a lot.
And a lot of really companies who've executives of a very high level of consciousness, they kind of realize that if their employees are happy, customers are happy, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a direct connection there. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the next one is kind of a bit challenging at the moment, although we don't know when people are going to be watching this episode, but the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. Yeah. It's a bit challenging now. I guess with a 2021 lens, where we get off the email kind of thing and try to chat with each other, like myself and Robert are chatting now on a Zoom call, for example. It's a bit of a weird one.
It is. I guess what will be challenging with this is, as I keep reading in the news about more organizations saying, oh, after this, we're going to allow you to work from home as much as you want, or which is WFH, right? Or for I'll say H. I won't say H. I'll get in trouble with American viewers.
Yeah.
But I was reading the other day about WFE, work from everywhere.
Oh.
Right, so you can work everywhere you want, wherever you want to be. So work from everywhere or work from anywhere, and it's. I think the question will be not just because we've been in lockdown or whatever because of coronavirus, but as we mature as people, what will that look like? Because if you start to motivate and trust your people more, part of that would be to say, I don't need to watch over you, right? Something we look for is something called authentic leadership or authentic management. And a lot of thinking there would be, you choose how you want to work. So yeah, John, it's an interesting question. What will the future be like for people if they have a job that they could work remotely? Will that be something they choose? Will that even be one of the benefits people look for going forward as they look for jobs? We'll see.
Yeah, I think the cat is out of the bag now, so to speak. So it'll be difficult to go back. Yeah, but I'm personally hoping to be working face to face because in the gig that I'm currently in, I was working there for 4 months before I met anybody. And it was interesting when I did finally meet one of my bosses, for example, because in a big company you got more than one boss. He was taller than expected. I was smaller than he expected. He was nicer than I expected. And then when I got to meet the teams that I work with 2 visits later, because we were working in different floors and, you couldn't switch floors and all this kind of stuff. And eventually when I met them, I understood things within about 20 seconds, what was really going on when I met each person. It was like, just like that.
Yeah.
So I do miss that. And I'm really looking, I think personally, my style is better when I'm face to face, but I've had to adapt to working in this kind of remote way the last year or so. So the next one then is a bit weird for me. So working products, shall we say, working value. Well, if you say value, it works okay. But if you say working product is the primary measure of progress, like something that's working isn't necessarily valuable. We probably won't agree on that one. And then the next one is kind of nice, but some people are uncomfortable with it. So agile processes promote sustainable development. In other words, like all that high energy that goes into deadlines, and then you know what happens. You kind of this kind of low energy after it, and it's kind of
yeah.
So I think that's nice. The sponsors, the developers, and the users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. But I think some people think that they're going to be on deadlines indefinitely. I think that's what they
absolutely. Yeah, you're right. And I know you said agile and Scrum are separate things, and they absolutely are. But I think the language of Scrum is tricky here. The word sprint. I think it means go as fast as possible. But I think it's critical here, the sustainable point, because something that's fascinating to me, and my previous career, long time ago when I still had hair and things, I was a project manager. And one of the hardest things in project management is planning. And if you think about it, the reason planning's so hard is because output's constantly changing as you move from different people or different pieces of work. And so plan something with a changing output is nearly impossible. But if you've got a group of people and they're doing a constant output, then your planning becomes quite easy. And so actually for organizations, this sustainable development idea isn't just about being nice and being cuddly with your people. It's recognizing that actually it allows your business, whatever it may be, to actually plan so much more successfully. So it has real good business purpose.
Yeah, actually, it reminds me of a very good TED talk on listening yesterday. So listening to the people in terms of what they can achieve would be quite good here as well. And the next one kind of blows away some of the myths, because if you open the dictionary and look up the word agile, and it usually says fast and flexible, something like that. But the next one really kind of nails the quality point. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility.
Yes.
So not leaving kind of bad stuff that you cringe about behind you. And by the way, I used to be a software developer, and I cringe at some of the stuff I left behind me. Let me tell you, I was like a technical debt factory, Yeah, not good, terrible. So I'm learning to develop again, actually, which is interesting, but mostly non-software for the last few years. And the next one then is very kind of Kanban friendly. I think it's a bit of a tongue twister. Simplicity. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. which like is basically stop starting, start finishing, isn't it?
Yes, I mean this is probably, I have to be honest, probably one of my favorites, if not my favorite. I think I don't want to speak for you, John, but for me, it's extremely common for organizations to be of the mindset of we must deliver everything by this date, which by definition you're going to produce probably poor quality by your balance of the normal three.
Yeah.
Of, time, scope, cost, and so on. So quality is potentially failure. But if you can actually recognize your work from a point of view of that there are things that are more important than others, that changes everything. If you do have an idea of priority, it shifts things. And simplicity is actually the idea of simply saying, but what's most important? What's really the focus here? And that for me is a massive mindset shift for most people in organizations, because it shifts ideas to, we need to talk about it, we need to collaborate to understand what is the right thing, right? So that pulls people together, it creates more face-to-face communication, it creates better understanding of the work that you're doing. So this for me is a really critical part of it, and I think culturally it's really hard because it's so important. It's easier not to have those conversations. It's easier not to try and prioritize work. It's easier not to talk to stakeholders. It's easier to say we have to do all this, right? So I think this is one of my favorites, but one of the hardest.
It is one of the hardest. Yeah, I agree with that. Because I often do a little simulation. There's a lovely simulation called Twig with people, and I play with them for an hour. If they don't want to have 2 days or 4 days to learn Kanban, so just spend an hour with me. And we play the game, and they all love it, and they make decisions using the charts and all that beautiful stuff. And then at the end of the game, I refresh the whole game, and I say, I just start everything, I said, would this be a good thing to do? I said, no, this is a terrible idea. I said, that's exactly what you're going to do when you go back to your desk. Yeah. And they do. That's what they do.
Yeah.
I think we all struggle with that actually a little bit, but well, I do anyway. The next one then is a bit software-y, but maybe we can kind of think of it in a more generic way. So the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. I think this is really more about trusting the team. That we don't. Well, I'm not saying you have to believe it. By the way, for all of these principles, it's not like you have to believe in them or anything. It's just that they are what they are. But if this was something that you thought was important to you, it would mean that you trusted the team to kind of make the right decisions.
This is a big cultural one, and I think it's becoming more and more relevant as we carry on into the future as time marches on. I think we're starting, for most people, to look back at the idea of very strict management models, the sort of management theory X kind of thinking, of I shouldn't trust my people, I need to tell them what to do, they're only here for money. I think most organizations are starting to shift away from that and moving towards what we think is more enlightened thinking. But whether or not towards self-organization yet, that's probably a good step. And it's a very important thing if you want, particularly Scrum, for example, to succeed. That's certainly one of the focuses of what you're trying to achieve. But I think just the movement of trust to the people who are doing the work, as you say, John, is a critical part of the success of this thinking.
Yeah, and the last one's kind of nice as well. David Marquet, the guy who wrote the book Turn the Ship Around. He's got some other books as well. I can't remember the title, but he talks about red work and blue work. And that the red work is where you're doing the work, and the blue work is where you're just stepping back to pause and reflect about, am I doing the right thing, or should we pause? Should we actually go in a different direction? And so the next principle kind of ties into that. So at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, and then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. Doesn't say how often or whether it needs to be on a rhythm, or just say regular intervals. Yeah, but teams struggle with this as well, I find, Robert.
Oh God, yeah. You're back into the psychology wheelhouse for me. This is a psychology problem. If you treat humans this way, where you say to them all the time, if you work hard, we will give you a bonus, right? If you treat them in this way, then their reaction will be, okay, tell me what to do, tell me what to do, tell me what to do. And so managers fulfill that by saying, go and do this. So a pretty simple loop, right? But then when we turn around and say, okay, you guys, you decide how to do something, right? They'll go, what? I don't feel comfortable with this, right? You're taking away what is comfortable to them and asking them to now take on responsibility. it's critical to recognize that when you empower people or a team, you're asking them to take on responsibility. And so the idea of them doing feedback on themselves, reviewing themselves, is a critical part of them recognizing their own self-accountability. Until people are accountable and responsible for their own work, they choose what they do and how they do it, you don't have empowered teams. And you certainly can't get to self-organizing teams. And I think this is one of those cultural shifts in organizations that Agile coaches are responsible for. That's one of our core things that we bring to organizations is to help empower that thinking within the teams and the management. Yeah.
Indeed. And so they are the 12 principles of Agile Manifesto. We talked about the 4 values. And what Robert and I might talk about later on is, well, we hear this figure of speech every now and again, Agile is dead, long live agility. How true is that, you know? But before we can even get into that discussion, after the break, we're going to talk about what is organizational agility. What does it even mean, actually? Is it really just the Agile Manifesto, or are there other ways of skinning the cat, as we say? I often get asked, what is organizational agility? What does it even mean? And I was challenged, actually, I think it was 3 years ago. I wasn't working in a software domain. I was working in non-software. I have been for the last 3 years, even though I was originally a software developer. But I was asked, you know, what is it, you know? And because we had people using the word agile all over the place, and we spoke before the break about, you know, what the Agile Manifesto was. But what is agility, and is it the same thing necessarily? So I think, you know, maybe let's start with why we need to back up and redefine organizational agility, and then introduce what we think it kind of boils down to. And so basically, you know, I'm going to talk about maybe what it's not. For example, we often hear this expression "change theater," you know, where we're just relabeling, you know, moving the seats around the chairs around the Titanic, so to speak, words and whiteboards, you know, stickers and all that kind of stuff, and dogma, step-by-step processes, and so on. And, you know, and really it's about delivering value in 5 dimensions, which I'm going to get into fairly soon. And change is constant. It's not something that you manage. It's for me, I work with a lot of clients who have transformations, including the current one. And for me, it's kind of sad when there are transformations, because it should just be the way we do things. In some organizations, okay, the level of consciousness might not be there yet. So we need these kind of injections to get something moving, but we should really be trying to set some kind of cadence, or some kind of way where the organization can improve itself. And, you know, maybe I'd like to talk about as well, what does it look like? What does it feel like when we really have that? I mean, what have you noticed so far, Robert?
Wow, this is a big topic. Yeah. So in organizational agility, it's anything and everything. I think one of the biggest issues with agility is it's a word in the dictionary, and therefore can mean anything. If they'd made up a word and then defined it, it would be very, very clear, right? But yeah, agile can mean anything. I mean, I get a little tired of people sort of saying to me, "Oh, we don't know what we're doing. We'll figure it out later. We'll be agile." That's not what it means. So I think organizational agility for me is it won't be the same for everyone. So please don't think that I have definition. But for me personally, it means a few different things. One, it means a new organizational model in the sense of organizational theory. So at the beginning of time, when humans started off, there was no organizations. We were individuals. And then as time moved on, we started living together in small groups. And finally, those became tribes. You had chiefs. And at that point, you start having people understanding how that organization works. You keep marching forwards, and you get to the Industrial Revolution. And now you're at the point with quite a complicated way of working. People understand long-term plans, things like that. But now the world we live in is quite different. It's much more complex technologically. It's much more complex from globalization point of view. And so it's not about agility being a target. It's not about becoming agile. for me, organizational agility is about being agile in our thinking and being open to change, not achieving a target as such.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's not about an end state.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that for me is a big shift, because most other things are read a book and know how to do it. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And I think as you said in the previous video, it's about being adaptive. And maybe that's a big part of the fact that you're building the organization to work and think that way. And then the other piece, John, for me is about where the responsibility lies. That it's no longer held with the higher ups, that it's something that's spread across the organization, because that's what allows the organization to be agile. The decisions are not only made at the top.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for that reason, when we're talking about, what the end might be, I think it's useful to understand what value means, because we talk about value so much, and what does it mean? So I made an attempt, Robert, to come up with something, and I'd love to.
This should be interesting.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this over a few years, and this is my fourth attempt now, believe it or not. So God love me, but. So I think value can be a mixture from a few different perspectives, and I wouldn't be preaching to anybody about what they should be, but you could kind of pick and choose depending what organization you are, I guess. And so the most obvious one would be value from the market, for the market, the customer, the consumer, the end user, selling, meeting needs and wants, I guess, and changing behavior in a good way. There's the boring old one, which we have to accept, which is organizational value. Sometimes organizations do want to be more efficient and so on. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. I think try to do the right thing and then try to do it right or later. But if you're trying to just do the wrong thing right, or as Russell Lakoff said, you're just going to be wronger, right? So but it is something to be considered, to be fair. And there's also stakeholders that we need to worry about, and employees, of course, probably one of the more important stakeholders. And of course, reputation of the organization. There'd be kind of two considerations so far, right? And then I used to talk about societal value, but I've kind of crystallized that now into the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So I think one of the reasons why the world is in the state that it's in is because we have been chasing customer, end user, consumer value almost to a fault. That's loads of plastic and carbon and all that kind of stuff. The 17 goals there. Not saying which ones you choose, but if you are delivering value, can you reduce your impact on the planet? This kind of stuff. But there could be other things as well: diversity, inclusion, all that kind of thing as well.
Sure. Yeah.
And then there's learning. As some people say, learning is the first citizen, and I'm kind of in that camp a little bit as well. But that could be in relation to the above, like the customer often struggles to articulate what she wants. So maybe helping her to do that through experiments, looking at analytics, doing research or whatever. And I think we'd be naive to think that it would be just all of those 4 points. I think there's an additional one, which is reducing risk. John Seddon talks about failure demand, which essentially means doing something that isn't right for the customer. Driving some projects home and killing the call centers. So customers are basically ringing with complaints because it doesn't work. And in some cases, 80% of telephone calls going into call centers are customers complaining, quite irate, actually. You don't know how to spell my name. It's asked me for my password 7 times. This kind of thing. I've only got one hand. I'm on a building site. Why you expect me to actually do another code on another phone as well? What are you talking about? And also technical mess. I didn't say the word technical debt, because debt is something that you think you're going to pay back. Sometimes people just create a mess and they don't go back. So reducing that technical mess. And if you have a backlog, like a product backlog, if you use Scrum, for example, I often talk about sticks of dynamite that are down the product backlog. Do we need to kind of bring them up and do a little bit of a controlled explosion and find out if this is going to blow up, like can we kill this before we spend loads of millions, kind of thing, and lots of energy. So what are your thoughts on that, Robert, in terms of value?
It's a really interesting discussion. This isn't just an agile discussion. It's just a concept of value is an interesting topic in itself. For me, I struggle with absolutes.
Yeah.
The sort of what is value.
Yeah.
Right? Because whenever you try and define it, it's going to be different from somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's one of the risks we have to consider. And I think that the second risk with the absolutes of value is that you can just cheat the system. And we see this all the time when one of my clients, they had this is how we understand value. And it was sort of impact and urgency, effectively. And my argument was simply, well, how do you ascertain the impact and how do you ascertain the urgency? And they said, well, we talk to the people who it's going to impact and we talk to people who it's an urgency. So, well, can't they just lie? If they want their piece, can't they just say, well, it's really impactful, it's really urgent? How is that a measurement? So they're basing these absolute figures on things. And it's a bit like Scaled Agile Framework. SAFe has the WSJF, weighted shortest job first, right?
Yeah.
A complicated formula to understand value. And value doesn't actually mean anything, is my argument. Nothing has any intrinsic value, right? If I said to you, I don't know, money, right? Money's a good example. Money has value. A £50 note, a €50 note, $50 note, whatever it is, that has value. Only because you, I, and everyone else agrees that it has value. If tomorrow all the banks suddenly said, no, we're not taking £50 notes anymore, suddenly that has no value. It only has value because the system it's in, and critically, what it's compared. That £50 note is valuable because it can buy you this much of something. So for me, value is actually a comparison. This is more valuable than that. That's how I ascertain value, because an item on its own has no intrinsic value. So I always come back to the fact that whatever it is, it has to be well understood and compared to other things. And then you understand its value compared to that. So that's how I think of value. I'm not saying it's right, but I struggle with sort of the absolutist definition of value. And I think it's a very hard thing to do. And I don't think there's any correct answer, but I like your idea of trying to understand it, to be able to explain it. It's a tricky thing.
Yeah, I can totally relate to what you're saying, Robert. I was in a company about 10 years ago, and we could actually calculate exactly how much money we were making in US dollars from the features, because it was a mobile app.
Yeah.
We were sending offers out to the phone, and then people would redeem the offer at the till. Boom, ching, ching. We could tell straight away. But we decided even then not to use money as the determining value, because we wanted more people to download the app.
Exactly.
And use the app and so on. And so, yeah, I've had lots of attempts in my naive days of doing formulas and stuff before I ever knew about WSGIF. And they're always wrong anyway. They just help you. There was one brilliant coach that I worked with in Northampton, and she said to me, John, this product owner came to her one day and said, I can't sort these. I need everything. So the coach said, no problem, I'll sort them alphabetically. And then she went, whoa. It's like, and you're right, it's all relative, but you just need to understand, like, what are we considering here when we talk about this? And yeah, you can't be absolute about it. I totally agree with that.
No.
Yeah.
It does come back to also the idea that there is a right answer. We know what is most valuable.
Yeah.
You won't know until they're all actually out there and they're being used or whatever, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's so odd to think of what do you consider valuable, right? Yeah. There's so many people out there who became millionaires and billionaires with something you think that would never be valuable. No one's going to want that. And yet you put it out there and it is, right? It's an interesting thing to think about, right? The push when mobile phones first became smartphones, right, was, I can see a sort of web page. This is really cool. Now most people don't use their phones to look at web pages. They use apps. And at first that wasn't the focus, but Apple's made its billions because they recognize they're building a platform to sell apps, right? So it's fascinating what is value. And I think the answer is it shifts, it changes.
It does. Thank you very much. Very good insights there, Robert. Yeah. So we're now going to move on to what is organizational agility. And I made an attempt to kind of put it together, but the first sentence I'm going to use isn't from me. It's from a man called Ken Schwaber, who's one of the co-authors of the Scrum Guide. I think it still kind of holds. The purpose of the next segment is not really about coming up with something very pithy, like the sentence I'm going to tell you, which is nice and short. The problem with short sentences that are pithy and all that is that it can be very open to interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
So the rest of this conversation is going to be about trying to be clear about what it actually is. And again, it's not absolute, because for different organizations, different words will be higher up the list than others, and so on and so forth. But just kind of a starting point to say, well, okay, if you don't know what it is, let's just stick this up on the wall and move the words around and see what works for us, and maybe get rid of some of those words. So the short sentence is organizational agility is an organization's ability to harness change for competitive advantage, which captures a lot of things, and I think it still holds true. What do you think, Robert?
I've read it before. I wouldn't have said I remembered it. I couldn't have quoted it to you.
Yeah.
And I think it's good. I don't think it covers it for me, because, or maybe it's just because it's constantly adapting and growing, and agility doesn't have a true definition, if you like. I think the world we're in now, I would say effectively that statement covers a VUCA world, in my mind. I was thinking about the volatility and the uncertainty.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it's speaking to. And I think we're kind of there. We're in a world with global pandemics. We're in a world with globalization at a rate that's staggering. The growth of China is unbelievable. Asia's growing at crazy rates, but South America and Africa are really starting to ramp up. And technology is growing faster and faster, right? Just think of Moore's law, the rate at which processors are gaining transistors and so on. The world is actually gaining speed in its complexity. So is it about being adaptive to change? Absolutely. I think companies you have to be doing that just to survive right now. The question is, how do you be further competitive, I think, in that situation? And then for me, organizational agility, because of that, is more about the mindset of the company of how are we going to meet that challenge. I think what you just described in that statement sort of, to me, defines the problem. It doesn't answer it.
Yeah, and you kind of, you kind of confirmed for me as well that it was very open to interpretation, because it kind of gave you a double take, and also gave me a double take, and I think everybody who reads that sentence, and I've seen other versions as well, but you could kind of pick what you want out of it and what does it really mean. I think we're kind of the same page there. So what I did, I made this effort, and by the way, one of my talents is not making things simple, so this is a struggle for me, I have to confess. But I made an effort at trying to come up with something that's as short as possible but clear. So when you're trying to be clear, it means you kind of makes it a bit longer. Okay, so I'm trying to strike that balance. It's almost like a change story rather than a definition of agility or anything like that. So here's what I came up with so far, and with the help of lots of people, being honest. Okay, so here goes. So organizational agility is about creating an adaptable organization with higher possibility to drive disruption in society, the industry, and the marketplace. It's manifested through more effectiveness in optimizing current value, which is kind of like milking the cow that we already have, and unrealized value, which is the cow we haven't found yet, right? With more frequency of impact, more quality, more learning, less drag, more flow, then more efficiency, second last word, and more work sustainability, so that we can kind of do this for the long term.
Right.
So that's what I think it is. I'm going to get into later on what does it look like and what does it feel like. But what's your reaction so far to this, Robert?
I like it. Like you said, it's still quite a lot. It's still verbose, but how do you not how do you try to describe it without doing that is the tricky thing. I think the question for all these things is that sounds like an outcome. This is what the organization will look like. We're there. And the challenge for all leaders and thinkers is going to be, okay, great. And how
do you get there?
I mean, one of my favorite books is by Frederick Laloux. I don't know if you've read it. Reinventing Organizations. And it's very much about this kind of thinking about that. How do you develop in that direction? But no, I really like that. It gets me thinking about, as my brain will always go back to, sort of the psychologically, how does a company develop into that?
Yeah. I have some ideas on that actually that I'd love to talk to you about on another show. We've got a journey, if you like, that and the theme is hit delete. So to develop this level of consciousness in the organization where we can achieve what we just talked about, we need to delete some things in the organization instead of adding things on. And I'd love to talk to you about that. It's a bit early days, but probably within a couple of months, I should be able to talk more about that. And you probably have some ideas on it as well.
That would be great. Yeah, absolutely. It's a fascinating topic, no doubt about it.
Yeah. So really, what I'm trying to get out of this is like, if we are going somewhere, what is it? You know what I mean? So yeah, kind of like a North Star almost. Yeah.
I think you've got a really good point. I think a lot of people will say, "Great, this is the manifesto, but what does it mean? What's this going to look like?"
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think your logic is sound. I think a lot of people will say to me, "Well, what does an agile mindset mean then?" Right, in the same sort of vein of, but what does it look like? How do I know what it is? And I think it's sensible to put that out there. I guess the big challenge is how you come to the conclusion that you've got there. Is it more powerful for an organization to figure that out themselves, of what we want to look like, and therefore you're empowering them to get to that themselves? Or do you create the milestone and say, this is where you're trying to get to?
Do you know what I find, Robert? I find that people really, really struggle and they jump at efficiency straight away. We just want to milk the cow, and then they could get blown away and could get disrupted. So rather than giving them a blank page, I could actually create a sentence with a load of blank words and they fill in the words themselves, and I could reveal them later on. But by having something, the idea is that you can move words around. So maybe we're not disrupting society. Maybe we're not in that place yet, for example. We're not even disrupting the industry. It might be just the marketplace. And maybe actually we're only looking at more current value right now, because that's where we are, kind of thing. So on your journey, you could strip that down and say, okay, if that's the North Star, what do we think we could achieve in the next, say, 12, 18 months? You know what I mean? And it is a bit of it's hard to reach. It's not very tangible. I would agree with that. There's a big journey to get in there. And what I'd like to get to next, to your point, is what does it look like? And what does it feel like? Okay. This is where it gets interesting, right? Because we do that too. Yeah. Okay, well, let's go, right? So it looks like cognitively diverse people collaboration. That's a hat tip to Matthew Syed from his book Rebel Ideas in 2019. Fantastic book. One of my two favorite books. My other favorite book is Black Box Thinking, which is his book as well. So it looks like cognitively diverse people collaboration. I'm not even saying you have to be in a team. Possibly applying holacracy, for example.
Oh, okay.
And one of my colleagues, one of your colleagues as well, is actually practicing that. Could be agile, lean, could be lean. I think I'm talking more kind of 21st century lean rather than the manufacturing lean, if that makes sense. Right. Lean, agile, the Kanban guys in there. Product management, there's a bit of a schism going on between agile and product management. There's lots of really good ideas in the product management world. So what I'm kind of saying here is you don't necessarily need to be following the Agile manifesto. In fact, it doesn't even have to be product management. It could be the 3 ways of DevOps, or it could even be the modern Agile manifesto. So I used to say it's underpinned by the Agile manifesto, but I think actually that's assuming that people want to be using Agile. There are other ways to achieve agility, is kind of what I'm saying here. What do you feel about that, Robert?
I think you'd be careful. You get kicked out of the Agile club.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think agility sometimes can be its worst enemy, in that it can be you must do it this way. If you're not doing this, you're not agile, kind of thing. For me, I don't see agile as sort of the end goal, I guess, which is perhaps sort of what you're saying. For me, it's about creating a workplace that is more universally successful. And by that, I mean, it's not just about, for example, chasing profit or dates or whatever. So when you say, what does it feel like to work there? That people actually feel rewarded. that I guess, to be blunt, that they're happy. The dream would be that you can create a workplace where people are certainly paid enough. I'm not saying they need to be, struggling for money, but their main reward is actually the work they're doing, right? I'm sort of straying to sort of Dan Pink's work here, I guess. But I think that we're at a point where the majority of people now are not working for food, right? The majority of people are not working because it's necessary, right? We have to have a job to make income. I understand that, but generally speaking, the majority of the world, at the point they're not earning money at that level, and now we're at sort of subsistence kind of level, and so what you do becomes more important. It reflects on you, and it impacts who you are and how you feel. So, I think quite simply, for me, where organizations are going requires a new level of consciousness, because we're not facing industrial revolution type problems anymore. We shouldn't be thinking in that way anymore of tell me what to do, I'll go and do it. And so I think really the big shift here for me for organizational agility is a shift towards organizations made of people who are consciously choosing how they work. And because of that level of empowerment, they'll have a greater level of self-satisfaction and of hope. And that's pretty much the reason why I do my job.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're going next, actually, right? So, like, in terms of what does it feel like as well? It feels like there's less BS, right?
That's a good cut through everything I said. That was a much better way to put it. There you go.
Yeah,
that's the version.
I'm a big kind of hashtag no agile BS kind of guy, but and what does that mean? I guess less change theater, less delusion, less micromanaging, less fear. It's like saying, well, maybe I shouldn't. Leandro Herrera would be killing me. Why are you talking about things that people shouldn't be doing? Like, don't think of the red elephant, and that's exactly what we think of. But I think it's good to address it, and then to be more polite and positive about it. I guess it feels like more humanity, more authenticity, more leadership. Not necessarily leaders, could be leaders at all levels, right? More engagement, and not just worrying about the current revenues, but also worrying about the future revenues. So there's a hint here of worrying about the long term as well as the short term. Kind of trying to balance that.
Yep.
So we're going to dig into this a little bit in terms of what do I mean by these, and then let's have a little chat about it. So what do we mean by more humanity? So more compassion. More invitation, not imposing ways of working on people. You have to do Scrum or whatever.
Right.
More psychological safety.
You're in my favorite place now. Yep, absolutely.
Good. And then trust, respect, team-based commitment, not people making commitment on behalf of teams. More openness, more inclusion, more passion, focus, and energy. There's a hat tip to Sir Mantra Ghoshal. He did a famous talk at the World Economic Forum a few years ago. And more fun, of course. So from a humanity point of view, dealing with that, from an authenticity point of view, well, really having self-managing teams, more self-managing teams. You don't have to be in a team, but if you do have teams, self-managing. More value. We talked about value earlier. More outcomes, more impact, the long-term effect. More sincerity, more empiricism, and more excellence. So we've got humanity, we've got authenticity there. But now we're going to move on to leadership, because one of the driving factors why I didn't go for a pithy explanation of organizational agility, because a lot of leaders, every second or third word was the word agile. And I had one particular case where executives, the people on the ground, I ran surveys in this, people on the ground, 75% of them believed that the executives knew what the problems were, and only 20% of them believed that the executives were doing anything about those problems. So I really want to drill in here on the expectations. Okay, so more self-awareness, more courage, because you're going to have to do some kind of brave things. More go see, actually find out what's going on. Be more acceptable about people speaking truth to power. And this is a hat tip to Simon Sinek. He describes sincerity as more alignment of what is said privately and publicly. less backlogs, so we can be more optimized as a one organization. More prioritization. We can have all the flow we want, but if the work isn't prioritized, we're going to be in trouble. More focus and more flow. And then some real behaviors that we need from leaders, like embracing uncertainty, not expecting a beautiful Gantt chart for the end of the year, serving teams, coaching at all levels, fixing problems, not saying, you've got a mandate. Yeah, you can fix that yourselves. No, we can't. Everybody. And then also, this is where the courage is needed, because often organization design work is needed. Because as you mentioned earlier on, Robert, what's our direction of travel or our goal or whatever we're trying to achieve, our vision, whatever you want to call it, but like whatever that is, agility is only a way to kind of get there. And often you need to change your organization design to be optimized for that. Yeah. So what are your thoughts so far on these? I mean, I'm going to get to engagement and revenue later, but
how many hours do you have?
Yeah.
I like all of those. I think the first step for all of those for any of them to come to fruition is some level of self-awareness. Because unless we recognize the situation we're in, we can't look to change it. And I think it's very common for people to go to work and just think, but this is how work is. And that's why I always think about previous times in history, because I don't know the future as much as I wish I did, right? And we've worked in several different ways in the past. Now we work very much we're moving out of it, but the last few decades have been very much based on Taylorism. And so I think it's important that for all those things to occur, that we recognize the way we work, so that we have the option to choose different ways of working. Until we know where we are, we can't shift. So self-awareness for me is what will give us those things. You talked about leadership at all levels. So in my mind, that's situational leadership, that anyone can lead, right? For those kind of things to occur, people need to be self-aware that they have the ability to lead a colleague, and that person can lead you at different moments and different times. We need to be self-aware of how we're interacting and how we pick our targets and how we can achieve them, right? To exactly what you spoke about. And I think that it's for the entire organization and individuals to take on this recognition and move in that direction, because we talk about our competitors all the time in industries, and we say, we've got to be competitive, we've got to stay competitive. And it's usually about technologies and things like that. And those will continue. And it's simply a race as to who gets that technology first, right? But if you can actually be competitive in the sense of your organization becomes self-aware, well, then you're going to be miles ahead of your competitors. And I think all the points you're raising there about how the organization works and thinks together, it's not about creating a nice workplace. It's about recognizing that in the future, this will be how companies will be interacting and will be working, because the level of consciousness is going to shift. All the problems we have in our current workplaces are because they were created by that level of consciousness. Einstein said that problems can't be solved by the conscious level that created those problems. You have to move to the next level to be able to actually solve them. And for me, that's why I look at agility, because it allows us to look at problems from the next level so we can easily solve them. And so that, for me, that's where it all comes together.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk to you about that. I'm big into that as well. I did a lot of work in spiral dynamics as well, but I'm careful about talking about it because it hasn't been peer reviewed. But it's like nutrition and lots of other things, mightn't be scientifically proven a lot of the time, but still very useful and helpful. So I just want to get into the engagement and then the big question really about agile and agility. But so what do we mean by more engagement? So that's like with society itself, with shareholders, employees, customers, consumers, end users, partners, other stakeholders, but not through big bang, less big bang, but more transparency, inspection, adaptation, some kind of empirical looping approach where you're checking in with these stakeholders. Because actually a lot of them don't know what they want anyway, and we help them to figure out what they really want by showing them what they don't want, because Yeah, if you get my point. And then what do we mean by more current and future revenues? Is, well, it's about having a more meaningful shared purpose. And so this is your point initially, Robert, where are we going? All right. And then more value, understanding needs and wants as well, outside in thinking, of the customer, in getting out of the building, meeting people. If there's some slowest part of your organization, if there's some kind of constraint, this is the hat tip to theory of constraints, maybe managing that, and hat tip to systems thinking, maybe more optimized as a whole. So that's quite a long definition of organizational agility. It is like a North Star. And what I'm curious about, Robert, is, when some people say, agile is dead, long and live agility, what are your thoughts on that?
And we're back to the using a pithy line and how it's being interpreted, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I think that the Agile Manifesto has multiple problems with it, and it's easily looked at in a way that is potentially arrogant, who says things must be done this way. And I think agility is more about, as you said at the beginning, being adaptive. And so I think you move away from a statement of you must be agile, or agile's better than everything else, to we're just building an environment where the focus is on achieving more. And by more, I don't mean delivery of more work, right? I don't mean that kind of performance. I think of performance in the sense of more success for everyone. And so for me, it's, what do you think of as more agility in the future? I guess a good example would be a company like Volvo, right? Volvo turned around and said, we're going to be the first to be pure electric. We're going to be the first for somebody will never die in one of our cars, right? There's a target so far and above what any other car company was doing that most people just laughed at it almost. But they've seen a massive uptick in sales, huge. And what you realize is they're tapping into things that aren't traditional. They're not just chasing money. Right. And in a world where people are saying we're worried about plastics, we're worried about carbon pollution, we're worried about the future of the planet, all these kinds of things, companies need to move beyond traditional models of making money to recognizing that, no, we need to do other things. Going back to your point of what's value, it's shifting, as it always does, but the thinking is shifting within companies as well. So for me, agility in this sense becomes about recognizing what's new and moving in that direction as to what's right for people. It's not a final destination, which maybe Agile felt like. So it's not about achieving something, it's about a constant achievement, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the Agile Manifesto is still very useful, but in a sense, it's a form of imposition in itself. These are the values and these are the principles. So when I present them, I just say, well, what resonates with you? And we'll go with that. So it doesn't feel as imposed, but it could be interpreted like that. But more importantly, I think the Agile industrial complex has really messed up Agile. It got corrupted. I think we corrupt everything in the end. But I think it might be time to move on, to something else. Product management holds some hope for me, actually. But that'll probably get corrupted too at some point. We just need to recognize that we might be ready for a new thing, and there's more than one way to do this. And we need to be open to let people work what way they think is the best way to get there.
Absolutely. People should judge for themselves. Yeah.
And it presents different problems, for guys like you and me, because when we go in and if we've got different teams using different approaches, it's like, oh, we need to be consistent. And so, no, they don't need to be consistent. They just need to kind of sync up in some way. Maybe we do need some form of alignment, but that doesn't mean we all have to, do exactly the same approach. We can have autonomy with alignment, can't we?
Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe one of the biggest challenges of as being an Agile coach, and by no way am I complaining, I love my job, please don't think that. Is the fact that I think people at all the time bringing Agile coaches to be Agile teachers and say, come in and tell them how to do it.
Yeah.
Right? First problem, why are you bringing me in?
Yeah.
Are you going to change? Right, is the first problem. A
Yeah.
leader to change the is a first thing to talk to them about.
Yeah.
But also, a coach doesn't tell you what to do. That's not what coaching is. Coaching is about asking people what they think they should do and then helping them on their journey, right?
Yeah.
Certainly, there's pearls of wisdom and all that kind of thing, but it's their journey. As a coach, I don't go in and say, you need to do this, because I don't know. They have all the context. They know their company, know their industry, their job and everything, right? So yeah, I think it's one of the challenges that Agile is being seen by some people as, a solve all, but we shouldn't be doing that, but more of a case of we just need to tell people how to do it. You can't tell people how to be agile. Agile is their own thing for each person. But for me, from my point of view of psychology, it's about the empowerment of people to be having better lives, better careers. And for each team and individual, that's going to be slightly different.
Robert, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today about Agile and organizational agility. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Genuinely my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much. If you would like your voice message to be featured on a future podcast episode, please leave a voice message at anchor.fm/Xagility/message. That's anchor.fm/Xagility/message. Thank you.